Good morning, everyone. We're continuing our story from Swami Kriyananda's biography of Master, Chapter 17, Master's Salient Characteristics. So let's pray together and then we'll go into our subject for today. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Divine Mother, you are in charge of our lives, and you often take us in directions that we would not choose to go, that we don't understand. Directions of suffering or loss or disappointment, and sometimes directions of unexpected fulfillment and joy. Help us to know that wherever our life leads, whatever unfolds before us, is consciously, lovingly, deliberately given to us by you as an opportunity for us to grow closer to our true divine self. Help us to see through the veils of desire and delusion. To thy hand behind everything. We are thy children. Guide us, bless us, inspire us, fill us with thy love. Om, peace. Amen. As it happens, we're in the last days. This is being recorded on April 29th, 2021. And this is, the continuation of this pandemic cycle that the globe has been in. I live in California. Everything is finally, it appears to be resolving, but Ananta's a worldwide organization, and we have many, many friends in India. And just as things are resolving here in America, they have taken a terrible turn in India. After a whole year of seeming like it wasn't going to hit that country so bad, all of a sudden, many, many people that are either Ananda members or known to Ananda members or family are facing extreme difficulties, especially around the city of Delhi, where they've overreached the hospital system and even the funeral system, the cremation system, just the worst pictures of what you have in your mind for a pandemic. And all of a sudden it's really happening, and it's happening to people who are spiritually very dear to Master and to all of us who are part of this family. So please, during this day, send divine healing energy, asking Divine Mother to give it to everyone who's greatly in need. One of the many things that Swami said to me that has served me profoundly well at all times in my life, but especially at a time like this, whenever Swamiji would see people going through very hard times, he would say, "This is the kind of suffering that brings people to God." Now, it's not that Divine Mother wants us to suffer, but when life does not work in the way that we hope it will work, and we are compelled to go deeper inside to find strength and hopefully joy in the face of these great difficulties, it's often in circumstances like this that we think more deeply, act more courageously because we're compelled to. And so even in the midst of all of this, those who love God and those who love Master are responding by turning toward the light, because this is the kind of suffering that brings us closer to God. But we can greatly uplift one another by the spiritual connections we have. So if you would add your energies and your prayers and your thoughts to those of so many others, that the divine light be present, comforting, blessing, guiding, um, sparing, if possible, um, all those that we love, which is everyone, but those especially that we have been given divine relationships with. So, having said that, let me now. Yesterday, I spent the whole day not talking about the characteristic I'd planned to, so let me see if I can do it on purpose today. But India is greatly on my mind, as it happens. Friends from India have recently, Americans have recently come from India, our Americans, meaning our people who've been stationed there for many years. And so it's particularly vivid in my mind what's happening there now. So now we're going to look at number 25 of Master, and it's very short what Swami says, but it's really beautiful. The subject is generosity, which in itself isn't that a beautiful word? I wonder if that was ever anybody's name, like patience and charity. I wonder if generosity was ever a name. It should be. It's a big word, but it's not bigger than any other 5-syllable name. Generosity. What a wonderful characteristic. Master's generosity extended far beyond mere money or material gifts. It included also, for example, allowing others to have the last word, deferring to their opinions, applauding whatever good they did. Generosity, I stopped and just loved the word for a moment because it's actually a word that gradually over time has attained great meaning for me. Over the first 10 years of my spiritual life, I lived as a nun with a group of women in those early years of Ananda. And I had many friends, and I was very active. And I also was working for Swamiji for a lot of that period of time. And so I was by no means a hermit, is what I'm trying to say. But nonetheless, I lived alone. And when everything was settled, I came back to my own tiny little trailer, and I had my own aura that I lived in. And I was new on the spiritual path and only in my 20s, which my experience tells me that your 20s is when you begin to get some idea of what karmic hand you've been dealt. Just kind of trying to figure out among all the conflicting points of view which one actually belongs to me, which is the one I really want. And I was trying to come to some level of self-understanding and look at the things in my life that had worked, the relationships that had been fruitful, the friendships that were enduring. What were my true values, in other words, because I really didn't know. And the word generous, and I don't mean this in any way that's meant to make me seem more important, but the word generous became very important to me because I realized that partly because I have a lot of energy, but I've always been generous. If somebody needs help, I want to help them. If I have some ability that would be beneficial to someone, I want to give it. If I have time, I want to share it. And being generous was extremely, I realized, fundamentally important to me, and it also helped me think through, what kind of friends I would need in my life, what kind of coworkers, what kind of a community I would need, because when that generosity is thwarted, for a person whose energy flows in that direction, it's extremely well, it feels immoral is the only word I can use. It's a breaking of dharma. And several times in my earlier life, I had been controlled by people who did not have the same generous spirit that I had. And I realized that it was a moral lapse on my part to allow that to happen. And of course, one of the reasons why have always felt so in tune with Swamiji and even with Ananda from the beginning, when that very first night when I met Swamiji, and I remembered almost nothing that he said. I remembered to this day vividly the experience of meeting him. And he delivered a lecture, and I remember nothing of it, except I do remember learning that he had this meditation retreat and that he was working hard to make this community, but at the same time that he was trying to build a home for himself and those who'd thrown their lot in with him, he was simultaneously running this public retreat. So on Friday they would plant the seeds in the garden, and on Saturday they would give classes all day, telling people about what they were doing, inviting people to join them, sharing what inspiration they had. That Swami's entire life plan was that Master had given him a commission to do a great work, and the one huge piece of that commission that Swamiji had picked up was this need to build a community. And Swami understood that the building of the community was dependent upon a generous attitude within the community itself. At one point when we were struggling, I use the royal we whenever I talk about Ananda. I was talking to my Indian friends, and I asked them, my friends from India, and I don't know what I even said, but I heard myself talking about all the devotees in India as we, even though I only know a few of them and I've only visited, I've never lived there, but it's just we, because we're all in this together. So when we were struggling, I'm not even sure that I was there at the village at that point, but we were struggling because to generate the income to build the community and to build the retreat simultaneously. And this serious proposal was made to Swamiji. The proposal was, why don't we close the retreat until we get ourselves together with the community? And Swami, because we can't, why are we trying to do everything at the same time? Swami's words were, if we close our heart to Divine Mother will close her heart to us. And it just absolutely unthinkable that getting the community together meant that we demonstrated that we were there to serve. We were not there just to make a beautiful place for ourselves so that we could just get up every morning and live in it. The entire point of what we were doing was to be an open doorway to provide inspiration for others. And of course, opening our hearts to Divine Mother was for truth-seeking souls who came to Ananda retreat for the same reason that all the rest of us were there, which was a longing for truth, a longing to be closer to God, a desire to have kindred spirits, to meet anyone in this world who actually resonates with your own vibration. It's a gift beyond imagination of expectancy, to quote Master's words about Samadhi itself. So when Swami then says, a salient characteristic of Master was generosity, every so often in the course of one's spiritual life, one realizes, oh, I actually got something right. It's very gratifying that, Swami would confirm some little idea that I have, or that realization that I had about myself all those years ago, that this was just a salient characteristic of mine that I had to honor because I had been careless about it. As I said, I'd allowed others to curtail in the name of whatever their values were. And I couldn't allow that to happen. So he says Master was generous. Swami uses two examples. He was not only generous with money and material things. There's several stories that Swami tells about the fact that Master collected antique canes and umbrellas. He also collected opals, I think. You think of it so odd, Master collecting things. Swamiji said it was just a sort of really literally a sort of a way to keep his mind focused on this planet. Weirdly, when Ramakrishna, who was a great avatar of the late 1800s, and he lived in a temple near Calcutta, Ramakrishna's difficulty in life was to keep his mind sufficiently on this plane so that he could relate to this world. There's many wonderful books about him, and he is a great avatar. And when you read the real firsthand accounts of being with him, like all great saints, you imagine them, and this is what we've been talking about, Master. You imagine them to be sort of cartoon characters of themselves. They're not. They're very natural. And Ramakrishna's disciples were talking about going to a festival in some nearby village. And Ramakrishna says, oh, he said, we'll take all the trouble to get over there. And as soon as I get there and see the deities, I'm just going to go into Samadhi and miss the whole thing anyway. So maybe, maybe we don't need to go. Therese, and this is just about the naturalness of saints. Therese Neumann, whose Master writes about in Autobiography of a Yogi, she was the Catholic stigmatist. I guess that's because she had the stigmata on her hands, on her forehead. Every Friday she would relive the Passion of Christ. Master said that she was Mary Magdalene in a previous life. And so every Friday she would just go back into it. Gradually it began to happen only once a month. But she never ate or drank. The only thing she ever took into her body was a consecrated host, which is, of course, just a cracker until it goes through the consecration, and then it becomes the body of Christ. And they would put it in her tongue and it would dissolve in her mouth. If it was an unconsecrated wafer, she would spit it out immediately. If it was a consecrated wafer, she could take it in. But reading a biography about her, she traveled a lot. She lived in Bavaria, and she traveled a lot. She had wonderful friends and siblings that she was close to, and she was very joyous. And she never needed to eat or drink. And they were always having to worry about where they were going to eat and what they were going to have. And she constantly just teased them about what a nuisance it was and like how much better off she was. And she was, Master just writes about the vision that she had on Fridays of the Passion, but she had visions all the time. They just, in the biography I read, they'd just be traveling and all of a sudden Teresa would be back in ancient Israel. And they would just stop the car and pull over, and she would go, and often she would tell them what she was seeing, what she was experiencing. Then they'd all sort of just get back and go on with their picnic or their little journey or whatever it was. This was all just completely at ease. But speaking of Ramakrishna, which is where I started, sometimes when he would come out of these Samadhi states, he would ask for a cigarette or a hookah. He would smoke, and you would think, now that's a really weird thing for him to do, but it was just to bring his consciousness back to this world, to just do something so that he could remember what body he was in, what he was supposed to be doing. Now, and so Master had these hobbies. He collected various things. And Swami writes about how he was negotiating with the owner of in some antique store, and he was, struggling for, just to, as Swami said, to be conscientious with the institution's money and not overpay. And when he finally sort of got the price he wanted and paid for it, then he just gave the man a tip, just more. And then the man was so pleased, and then he gave Master a special antique umbrella. Afterwards, Master said, that man's shop was so poor. He had such a poor floor there. I think I'll buy him a better floor. And Master just did. The money that flowed through him, he would just never acquire it. In another sort of a joke, Master would often give the monks small sums of money so they could go out and buy ice cream. They were just young men, and they were living in this ashram setting, and there was no ice cream shop there. So Master would often give them money to go out and get ice cream. And Swami tells of one story where he was saying to the young men who were working, it's kind of a hot day, isn't it? And they knew where he was going with that, but they just played along, and they said, no, sir, it's not too bad. Gosh, seems to me like it's really a hot day. Well, if you say it's a hot day, sir, then I guess it is a hot day. And then he laughed and he said, I can't keep money and I won't. And then he gave them $1 or whatever it was required to go out and buy themselves some ice cream. Swami said that he saved that $1, and he went out of his own wallet so he could have the $1 that Master gave him. It's actually in the shrine of the Masters at Ananda Village. One of the little displays is a $1 bill that Master gave them for ice cream. But that statement of Master's, I can't and I won't. So again, as I was talking yesterday especially when I was revisiting the question of childlike. For the masters, this isn't oh, I'm supposed to be generous. In Whispers from Eternity, there's this wonderful poem, teach me to spend as joyously and happily for others as I spend for myself. I mean, that's very interesting because everybody tells us that we have to be practical. And so Swami would always say the word practical, it's just that sort of tight voice. People don't say, with a loving, sweet voice. They say it, we got to be practical. That was when the man was going to foreclose on Swami's land at Ananda village, even though they'd had a bargain about how Swami was going to pay his bills. The man saw the chance to be able to take the land away from Swami. You got to be practical. Swami said, you mean greedy and inconsiderate is what you mean. No, you have to be generous. Master says, I can't keep money and I won't. What are resources given to us for except to do good work for God? So this is just, Master just did that. He, God is my stocks and bonds. When someone came and said, what are the assets of this organization? Master said happily, absolutely nothing. God is our stocks and bonds, which is we're here serving God, not to accumulate. So this is what we do. But the generosity of spirit of material things is very touching. But Swami said it went much farther. Swami didn't mention a third part, that Master was, well, generous doesn't even begin to describe it, but he was completely generous with his love, with his affection, with his desire to help. And generosity is it's generosity of spirit. If there was any way that Master could help someone, spiritually speaking, he would. And earlier in this section, we had that phrase that Master said, nobody crossed his path except that it had a specific divine purpose. And that specific divine purpose was always the opportunity for him to help someone grow closer to God. And there was just never a time when he wasn't willing to do that. I remember Swami Kriyananda, of course, had the same extraordinary generosity of spirit. I remember when he was sick in bed, I put this in the book about Kriyananda, the first book I wrote. He was sick in bed with a high fever, with chills. He was just very ill, and he'd invited some of us over just to keep him from dying of boredom, and I think just to have us around. I don't know. I was sitting there, I was reading to him from the novel The Robe, which is a story about a garment of Jesus, and it passed through the ages. It's a wonderful novel. And I sat for a long time and read it out loud to Swamiji and a few of us who were sitting with him. And this man comes and knocks on the door. And I went, at that point, Swami's whole house was just the dome. So his bedroom was just a loft. So when I opened the front door, I was 10 feet from where Swami was sleeping, even though there was a visual barrier from where Swami was in bed. So I opened this door, and this man says, I have to see Swami. I have to see Swami right now. Very agitated. And I knew the person, and he was a bit emotional and overdramatic. And I was there. I was the lion at the door. I wasn't about to let him in. So I insisted that we go outside, and we talked in a low voice. Swami is very sick. He has a very high fever. I have to talk to him. I have to talk to him now. Swami is very ill. He can't talk to you right now. All of a sudden, I hear full voice from Swami, who's there, Asha? And I said, so-and-so is at the door. Tell him I'll be right down. Swami gets up, puts his bathrobe on, goes and doesn't even sit, just stands in the doorway. After about 10 minutes, I come down and say, sir, would you like to sit in the living room? No, I'm fine. Why would I need to sit? Just like that. He talks. The man's problem was real to him. I'll say that. It's not for me to say what is a serious problem. It's the person who's having it. So he thought it was a serious problem. Swami talked to him for 20 or 30 minutes, just standing there. Just sort of did the whole thing. Swami was absolutely full strength, completely attentive, just finished the whole thing. Man was unspeakably grateful, went home. Swami walked the 10 feet back up to his bed, took off his robe, got back into bed, and started shivering with the fever again. It was just like, okay. I mean, that's generosity of spirit. And I remember when I was first working for him, because I had a tendency to be protective, which he understood and respected, but did not want me to do. And the way he put it to me, and I've always kept this clearly in mind, you must never make someone feel that my convenience is more important than their welfare, because it is not. Just like that. Oh, yeah. Because I thought his convenience was more important than anything, because I was the lion at the door. That was my job. No, he said, you must, if you're going to represent me, you have to represent me. And my convenience is never more important than their welfare. Myself, actually, I faced that. This was very early on. He went into seclusion, and I got myself in trouble. Let's just put it that way. We don't need to draw a finer point on it, but I got myself into trouble. And I didn't want to disturb his seclusion, because I didn't want to disturb his seclusion, but my friend Seva told Swami that I'd gotten myself into trouble, and what were we going to do? So Swami calls me down to his house. Swami's in silence. He doesn't break his silence. We have a conversation. I talk, Swami types his answer. So I'm standing behind him, and he's typing his answer. I'm speaking, he's typing like this. And we sort of sorted through what I was going through, and of course, he rescued me, which was very important to be rescued. And then I said, I'm so sorry, sir, I had to disturb you. We were walking out. He was walking me to the door. We were at the door. I said, sir, I'm so sorry that I had to disturb your seclusion. And he looks very sternly at me. In emotions like this, we go all the way back around to the office. He sits down at the typewriter and he writes, you insult my friendship. And it was like, wow, I thought I was being considerate. He said that you would imagine that my seclusion is more important than your welfare. And so once again, oh, that's real generosity of spirit, isn't it? It's like, I don't exist. I'm just here. I'm here to serve. And why would I not want to serve? And Swami then extends it that Master, he had great respect for other people's opinions. He didn't need to have the last word. He never needed people to know how powerful and how enlightened he was. None of that. He was there to serve, period. And his energy had one purpose, which was to help others. And there was, again, this is not just discipline on his part. It can be discipline on ours until it becomes realization. There was no self to protect. Everyone was just the same. Anandamoyi Ma, in this, I read about her just recently. Today seems to be an All Saints Day. Anandamoyi Ma was being sort of, just moving around among so many crowds and so on like that. And one of her devotees said, doesn't it bother you to have, just have all these people around? She said, am I bothered to have my right hand with me? She said, it's everyone to me is the same as me. What's the difference? Now that's what we're really talking about. And in fact, I'll finish with another one from Anandamoyi Ma. Swami said something to her about how generous and unselfish she was with her time and attention to him. And she said, oh, is that how it looks to you? And the way Swami came to understand that, or even she explained it, which is, there's no separate self giving to you. You think that I'm separate from you, giving to you. Is that how it looks to you? That's not how it looks to her. It's just we, the entire world. And that's Swamiji, that time we were in Disneyland when he was looking at the crowd, and he said, imagine not only loving all these people, but equally being every one of them. He said that's who Master was. Gives a new meaning to the word generous, doesn't it? But it still gives us a beautiful stroke of the divine that we can aspire to express. God bless you.